Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. My guest today is Jim Hahn. He is Senior Business Director, Thought Leader Engagement at EMD Serono. And we talk about the Thought Leader Liaison role and how it fits into pharma. Awesome conversation. I learned a ton. I think you guys are really going to like this. So do me a favor, if you do and you get value from it, please share it with others. As always, I appreciate all your support of this show. Hey guys, welcome to the MSL Talk podcast, a show specifically designed for MSLs and all things field medical. If you get value from these episodes, please click the subscribe button and share this with others. Tell all your friends. Thank you for all your support. Hey Jim, welcome to the podcast. How you doing today?
Great, Tom. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Guys, I'm excited because we are going into uncharted territory. This is a conversation that I'm really looking forward to because we haven't covered this topic. And I'm really interested in learning more about thought leader liaisons. And Jim's the guy. So just so happens that Jim was introduced to me through colleagues. He was at Mass East, but we missed each other. And then somehow we reconnected and we had this was just an idea that came about. And here we are. So before we get into it, you want to do a quick introduction?
Yeah, sure. Jim Hahn, I work for EMD Serono, and I've been in the business for about 30 years. Right now, I'm the Senior Business Director for the Thought Leader Liaison team in the West region.
Awesome. So guys, we're going to get into it real quick. We do have a sponsor. This episode sponsored by MSL Mastery, which provides programs, skill development programs for MSLs and aspiring MSLs. So for more info, go to mslmastery.com. There's some new programs on presentation skills. And then there's the Aspire MSL program, which is how to land a position as your first MSL position, which is an online course. It's really good stuff. We have tremendous success, especially recently with people starting their first MSL position. So check that out at mslmastery.com. All right, Jim, let's get into it. So tell us, what is a thought leader liaison? Let's start there. Let's start with the definition.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, first I'll say that the Thought Leader Liaison reports in through the commercial organization. So it's important to differentiate where they, sort of sit, if you will. I'd say it was 15, 20 years ago that probably more in the biotech aspect or part of the industry where it was determined there was a need for an expertise on the commercial team, particularly to call on key opinion leaders. So I think the TLLs was born out of that as the business continues to evolve. And the TLL generally reports in through like senior leadership or through marketing, within that commercial organization, not necessarily through sales. The objectives are tied to the commercial objectives. So whether that's increasing share, increasing demand, or expanding on the market, it just depends on the therapeutic area that you're talking about. But the TLLs and their activities are driven towards whatever those commercial objectives are. So I'd say, in essence, they're deployed to create a stronger presence among key opinion leaders.
Okay. So can we get into, and that's really helpful just as a foundation, because I think there's probably a lot of people that aren't really sure exactly where the role sits. But now that we know that, can you talk about what the key responsibilities are of a thought leader liaison? Like what exactly are they responsible for doing?
Yeah, I mean, just starting with the key thought leaders or key opinion leaders, centers of excellence, high prescribers. In essence, the target list, if you will, for a TLL is going to be directed at those individuals. So let's say if there's 1,000 prescribers in a therapeutic area, there might be 100 in essence that are really key to creating regional and national influence. So I think that the number one thing, that behavior, the thing that the TLLs need to do is to get to know the needs, beliefs, and the thought process behind the protocols that these key opinion leaders have. Because really what we have to do as a thought leader liaison is liaison to the broader organization and connect in a compliant way, our HCP needs with where the organization would be collaborate or partner. And that even extends out to third parties like patient advocacy groups, right? Anytime you can create a connection between your HCP and the things that they're looking to do or connect with becomes an important facet to the relationship and what they can accomplish. So again, the key thing here is that it's tied back to the commercial organization.
Yep.
And the needs of the commercial team. As another responsibility that typically you find the TLLs have, they're responsible for the speaker management, choosing a speaker for programs, peer-to-peer programs and such, and also ongoing speaker training updates that are done throughout the year.
So it's interesting because when you hear the title, you almost think that a thought leader liaison would almost be similar to an MSL in some extent, where they interact with and communicate with external thought leaders and key opinion leaders. But what it sounds like what you're saying is they do, but it's really to organize and navigate how the organization will then service, for lack of a better word, that thought leader and provide the right resources for that thought leader. Is that accurate?
Oh, I think you nailed it. That's exactly right. I think that each thought leader has a different sets of needs, interests, and sometimes those fall to the medical side and sometimes they fall to the commercial side. And depending on which side of that line they fall to, you now have, the thought leader liaison or the MSL to address those needs and work with the customer on that
Awesome.
front. Yeah.
And looking at, so being heavily entrenched in the medical science liaison community, obviously this podcast is for MSLs. Typically what we see as far as the background for an MSL would be advanced scientific degree, doctorate level background. Is that consistent with what a thought leader liaison might require? Is that a requirement for TLLs as well?
Yeah, there are not those degrees, an advanced degree requirement for TLLs. I would say most of the TLLs have probably come from a path where they had a very successful sales career.
Mm-hmm.
They've exhibited strong interpersonal relationship skills that are essential to HCP engagement. And I think this is where it gets closer to what the MSL is doing. They do generally have a more advanced sort of understanding of the disease state, a higher sort of clinical credibility, if you will. That I don't think it ever really gets near to or rivals an MSL, and certainly there isn't necessarily degrees tied to it. But at the same time, it's not uncommon for advanced providers, for example, nurse practitioners, PAs, or PharmDs, and other healthcare experienced folks to take a role in as a TLL. So that does happen quite often. So, but it's not a requirement.
Got you. Okay, that's helpful. And I imagine that the strategic objectives are going to be different for a TLL versus obviously an MSL. Can you talk a little bit about obviously you talked about what they do, but what are some of the strategic objectives and goals?
Yeah. So again, I think this is where it goes. If you always go back to the beginning and recognize that any particular pharma biotech company have one objective, but they have two distinct teams, right? With medical affairs and the commercial organization. And that's where the branches start to really differentiate in terms of what their objectives are. So I think anytime you want to, look at what a TLL is doing and differentiate it in terms of the strategic objectives versus, let's say, an MSL, you just look to that, that set of objectives that each of those teams are going to have, right? Medical team is going to be looking to develop and execute their medical strategy, drive data generation, either to fill gaps or address unmet needs. They're obviously optimizing their scientific exchange and trying to gather medical insights. That isn't at all what a TLL is doing, right? The TLL, they're aligned to whatever the sort of marketing strategic objectives are that they can implement or foster through the key opinion leaders and through centers of excellence, and depending on what the therapeutic area is.
Got you. So what would you say? So what are the benefits to a TLL team? Like, why wouldn't you just have a sales team on one side and then an MSL team on another side? What would the benefits of a TLL team be as another entity?
Yeah, I think, especially in biotech, as things have gotten more complex, there's a recognition that as your sales teams are deployed, they might have anywhere from, let's say, 50 to 60 targets, right? So if you think about your territory and what you have to do to navigate that territory and target 60 or so HCPs, it doesn't leave as much time to call on those key opinion leaders and those thought leaders that have national and regional influence and also have a whole different sets of needs, right? So if you're in neurology and you're calling on general neurologists, they're seeing smattering of neurological diseases, they don't focus or concentrate on any one area. Whereas the centers of excellence in a particular area of neurology and the key opinion leaders, that's all they see. And so their interests go much deeper, and the ways they want to be involved with a company, a biotech company, is going to be different. So in some cases, it's medical and it's trials and studies, and that's going to fall then to your MSL. But in other ways, they're trying to create connections and establish relationships throughout the network of patient advocates and speaking and being involved in ad boards and really having, a presence across that space. And so the TLL is dedicated really to, let's say, 10% of the total volume of targets that are out there. And they're given certain opportunities to engage with that key opinion leader differently than their sales rep. And their relationships go much deeper, and they spend more time with them, really at trying to understand the needs of that customer so that they can align that to the resources and assets that a company can provide, to any given customer. So I think really that's where the TLL was born from, was the opportunity to concentrate more on those providers who are, are going to have a distinct influence and presence in a particular therapeutic area. And from a commercial standpoint, it was hard to do that as a sales rep if you have 60 other targets.
Yeah. Interesting. So that's, I guess it all kind of makes sense. It comes together in that. So if the TLL is only responsible for really, 10% of the thought leaders, so it's just very targeted to key individuals, and it's almost like a concierge service, if you will, where you just want to make sure that you're taking care of your best customer,
right,
so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. And listen, access has grown increasingly difficult, right? We all recognize that. I mean, certainly COVID tested that very much in terms of being able to get access back to even to the level it was before COVID. So TLLs are given certain opportunities to engage with customers outside of the office. Typically, a sales rep really can only see an HCP in his or her office, and TLLs are able to engage with customers outside the office. And so that opens up opportunities, whether it's at a congress or at a meal. You have much more time, and that time allows you to build that relationship, build a level of trust, and then understand how you can align, commercial objectives with the needs of the customer.
Got you. Interesting. So then, are there metrics and KPIs?
Yeah. And that one is always going to be dependent on what the objectives are that any given organization has for their commercial teams and specifically for the TLL teams. So I'd say what you typically see is the TLL is paid out on an annual incentive plan, and that incentive plan or that annual plan is really driven by quarterly MBOs. So the MBOs basically will outline really what the measurement is of performance that they might give a TLL team. You're looking for the TLLs to demonstrate a level of leadership and strategic thinking and how they go about their business, how they execute on, let's say, programs or resources. And you also want to see that they continue to show that demonstrate like a clinical understanding and a credibility with the HCPs, because they really need to be able to engage with them at a higher level so that they have that credibility and trust. And so you're looking at all those things, I guess, in managing and evaluating the TLLs.
Got you.
Yeah. And they generally also work across, a territory or an area. They're not as limited by what their geography is, because the more people that an HCP knows in an organization, the better, right? So the relationships start to expand, and then you get to know people across the nation, and it's very effective.
Right. Yeah. And what's interesting, it's just interesting as I'm talking, I want to be 100% transparent. As we're talking, I'm learning a lot, because a lot of this stuff I kind of thought, maybe I assumed, but I didn't know all of these details. So and forgive me for just hammering you with questions, but there's so many things that are coming into my head. And the next thing is, so how do TLLs and MSLs collaborate? Or do they work together on things, or how does that collaboration work, if at all?
Yeah. Well, I mean, since they're both probably calling on and targeting this, very similar number of HCPs, it's really important that they're working together, or at least appear to the customer that they're up for working with the same company, right? From the same company. There's clearly lines of delineation and important compliance and legal differentiations and policies put in place so that what each of the customer facing teams are doing is appropriate. they're in the field together, and there are going to be times when they're targeting the same customer. So I think, the key is communication. At the
Yeah.
end of the day, if they're communicating weekly or appropriately, then they know what each other's doing. It's not that they know the details of what they're doing, right? But they know what each one is involved with in terms of calling on customers. And I'd say the handoff is key, right? If it's working well, a TLL and engaging with a customer finds out that they have certain questions from that only medical can answer, or certain things that they'd like to be able to do with the organization that drives medical. That should increase the frequency with which medical can easily engage in a handoff to the MSL. So it should increase. And then the other side of it, when a medical is engaging with a customer and their questions or requests fall back to commercial, something commercially related, then that's an opportunity to communicate with the TLL or the sales rep to get the information that the customer needs. So it should be very effective for all parties, but it does also mean that sometimes there's that competition for time.
So now, as you said that, it kind of made me think: are there any like conflicts? Is there any dissension between on the troops when it comes to TLLs versus MSLs versus sales? Like, how does that all everybody play nice in the sandbox? Or
Yeah, I mean, if you take three individuals, they're all customer facing, they each have different set of objectives and what they're after, but they're all targeting their attention to the same individual. It's possible to see how there could be some issues or conflict, right, in terms of utilization of an ACP's time. ACPs generally are so busy that they don't have time to see everyone, right? So then you end up seeing three people from the same organization and you wonder, can I just consolidate it to one? And I think that's where you start to see it's not so much a conflict, it's just a challenge. And that's why the communication is so important. But I think the sales reps, they're looking for a total office relationship. So their time in an office may or may not be with the HCP specifically. It could be just something where they're really trying to make sure that the company's positioned everywhere they need to be for that entire office, which is responsible for the care and availability of therapies. And the TLL, right, has their commercial objectives, and the MSL has theirs from a medical side. So the key is to make sure that they're communicating. I think there was one example that comes to mind is we started as a TLL team, we had journal clubs. So we had a set of papers that were separate and different from the journal clubs that the medical team had, that the MSLs were using. But just the idea that we called them journal clubs created a conflict. Like the MSLs were like, we do journal clubs, and for you guys to do them also gets confusing for the customer, which I totally agree with. We ended up just changing the name to lit reviews, right? And the other thing that's important, and again, that's just a subtle thing, but you want to back away from areas where you're creating confusion for the customer. And I think that's where you also have to recognize, if you're a TLL and your customer really would just prefer to engage with medical, which is often the case with many of them, you need to find ways to make sure that your MSL has the right away, if you will, and that they have exceedingly more time with the customer, because that's where the customer's needs and desire is to engage with the company, is with medical. So if you're communicating, then you can land on the right balance. And I think that's sometimes what's missing when there's, let's say, a conflict.
Yeah. Cool. Wow. So then like when you look at the access conversation, and that's a big issue right now, is FaceTime for sales reps, for MSLs. Where do TLLs fit into that? Do they get more access? Is it because they're just responsible for that top 10%, thought leader? Is it easier for them? I'm curious as to how that fits in.
I mean, sometimes the sales reps are bringing in the TLL, right? If you get an off-label question, or if you get a question that's for information as a sales rep that pertains to a congress or poster, you're going to go to your MSL, you're going to do a medical information request, and you're going to direct it to medical. But the TLLs have a lot of resources and assets that the sales reps don't have. So there are opportunities where the TLL has a slide deck pertaining to a disease state or attributes of the brand that you're promoting that the sales rep doesn't have. And so a lot of times the sales rep can bring in a TLL as an additional resource to talk to customers. So even though we don't target everyone that the sales reps target, we're there to help drive commercial objectives. Yeah. So I think the time works out in terms of what everybody needs if they're communicating, and it generally works pretty well, right? It's process and people. If you have a good process in place, that's a start, but then people need to work together effectively too.
Yeah, no, it sounds like I mean, as you're talking, I think probably the biggest thing you said is how important it is to communicate. I think that communication piece in these scenarios, I think it's so pivotal. I think it's so important. And I
Yeah.
also kind of get the sense that TLLs really seem like they sit more into either large pharma or mid-sized pharma. Like, are there TLLs at like a small biotech?
Oh yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. I mean, it depends on what you mean by small, I guess. I guess mid-sized biotech for sure.
yeah.
And in small biotech, maybe not. But again, anywhere you need to engage key opinion leaders from a commercial space, that's your best bet
Yeah.
is the
Yeah.
TLS. And yeah, so
Would you say, does the role and responsibility of the TLL vary depending on therapeutic focus?
yeah, yes, absolutely. Even across companies in the same therapeutic area, like taking MS for example, you're going to have, depending on leadership, right, and how they feel that it's best to deploy the TLL team, you might have a different set of objectives.
And I would imagine rare diseases too.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And then what about like for job seekers? Like there's a lot of people that are listening to this that, maybe on the market and or maybe looking to break into industry. What types of backgrounds when you're hiring, like what types of folks are you looking for? How
Yeah.
experienced? What's the skill set? Walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah. Sure. First and foremost, I'd say you're looking at probably the track record of high performance field representatives, people from a field role. So it might be it's typically from a sales position, right? I mean,
Okay.
that's probably the biggest feeder into the TLL role is someone with a successful track record. But in order to be successful in the TLL role, you really have to have that disease state expertise, and you also need to have strong interpersonal skills because it's a people business. It's about building the trust and relationship with the customer. So people with advanced degrees, that's a huge, and who already have, like, so let's say, an established network or sets of relationships. I mean, we just hired an advanced provider in the therapeutic space that we're in, doesn't have any formal pharma or biotech experience in a customer facing role, but certainly all the time she spent in providing healthcare, she understands, and the network that she has, it contributes to the likelihood of success if it's the right position and it's motivating, right? And so that opportunity, is increasingly, I think, for TLLs is going to people outside of the sales force,
Mhm.
and more to people with that specific expertise.
Do you see this? I know it's probably going to be a biased answer because you're so entrenched in this space, but do you see this as a growing field? Do you think that it's just going to continue to evolve?
Well, I mean, I've known senior leaders who've predicted since like the early 2000s that pharma and biotech would evolve where reps weren't going to be needed.
Mm,
And that has not panned out to be true at all. And COVID tested that theory probably more than anything. Um, I think that what we're seeing is that as pharma guidance continues to evolve, companies will need to continue to evolve to see how they want to deploy people from a commercial standpoint. And nothing's going to beat the face-to-face engagement that is generated with people going to see HCPs out in their offices. Nothing will replace that. And medical is a whole different side. You're never going to get away with executing a medical strategy without an MSL, without
yeah.
someone going to see that. And so, yeah, so I think the TLLs and sales reps are both in a good position, and it'll evolve how it looks depending on how the market changes.
Yeah.
Um, but I think both positions are ripe with opportunity, and each therapeutic area will probably determine or dictate what those objectives look like, and the type of person that you're looking to hire.
I come from a sales background. So I spent like the first 10 years of my career in sales, and it's very near and dear to my heart. I'm really kind of more in the MSL world nowadays, but we have, we recruit MSLs, we've recruited salespeople, we continue to recruit TLLs and, anything across the board. I agree with you. I think that the face-to-face interaction and that that relationship, I think, is the foundation. Relationship with external customers, I think, is so pivotal to the success of an organization. And for that reason, I think that the threat of artificial intelligence, because people are saying now, well, you know what, we're not going to need sales reps anymore or MSLs or TLLs because everything's going to, physicians and KOLs and thought leaders and whatever else, they're all going to they're going to talk to a computer. They're going to have all their interactions with a machine because the machine is going to learn everything it needs to do to answer those questions. How do you feel about that?
Yeah. No, it's way more fun and engaging to talk to someone. I mean, the relationships that are built over time with HCPs and getting to know them and and them feeling heard and understood, I don't think that's something that you're going to get interfacing with a computer.
Yeah.
Right. That human connection, it's just hard for me to imagine a time so far down the road that something on a computer or mechanical could replace that human interaction that we have. And I think that's essentially why experts and MSLs and customer facing teams, no matter where they're from, are going to be essential to successful brands and innovation, right? I mean, the innovation that's coming from AI or from the lab, those things are all going to feed the need for the presence, I think, of these field teams. So,
yeah, no, I agree. And I say that seriously, but kind of joking at the same time, because you can't even joke about stuff anymore because you just don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
You just don't know. But that's been a conversation that seems to keep, or a question that seems to keep coming up at conferences.
Yeah. Interesting.
So I'm in agreement with you, but so what would you say, what's the next 5 to 10 years look like for the field interaction for pharma and biotech companies with their external thought leaders?
Yeah, well, I do think increasingly that thought leaders are extremely important to the commercial success of a brand. In other words, we think about our customer facing teams and what they do to enhance the growing demand for a product. But I think your thought leaders, the physicians out there, and the voice they have carries much more weight. And so you need to have both a strategy that involves medical and MSLs and commercial to combine to sort of persuade those thought leaders and influence them on how they are projecting what your brand looks like within that market. And that influence is essential both from a medical and commercial standpoint, because those thought leaders, I believe, increasingly are going to influence more and more prescribers, right? The generalists and those that not only look to a company to understand a product, but look to their peers. And so, yeah, I think it's going to be an increase in demand for customer facing teams, specifically MSLs, maybe TLLs, to position themselves appropriately with those key opinion leaders. And we know now we differentiate thought leaders by local influencers, regional influencers, national influencers, and now even international influencers, right? So there's all sorts of levels and ways that you can really segment out just how important these thought leaders are to any given therapeutic area and the success of a brand.
Yeah. And digital influencers, right? I mean, that.
Oh, well, yeah. So, yeah, I don't even know how to qualify their reach.
Yeah. Yeah. And obviously, you could be a regional or national influencer and be a DOL at the same time. So there's a lot of overlap in here, but Jim, this was awesome. I really learned a lot, and I love having these conversations where it's novel. This was a novel topic on this podcast. We haven't covered this yet. So I hope it helps a lot of people. And I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. The success you've had on this is really impressive. When I heard about your podcast and seeing how many followers you have, granted, a little nervous to be on here, having not really talked about it in the general way, but I appreciate you having me on. It was a ball. Thank you.
Well, the reason this shows a success is because of people like you, is because there's just so many amazing, influencers and leaders that are out there that take time to do this. So this would not be successful without someone like you and all the others that I'm so grateful for the opportunity to chat with, and for all of you guys that are listening and sharing these episodes. It really means a lot. And I just appreciate every single one of you. So Jim, thank you again. We'll definitely have to maybe consider what would part 2 look like for our next conversation. I'll have to think about that.
All right. Thanks, Tom.
Awesome. Hey guys, thank you for listening. As always, appreciate all of your support, and we'll see you on the next episode.